Hello, and welcome to Digital Equity for all students through open source. In the next 45 minutes, you will hear our ideas of how we revolutionized tech at our school with open source software and how you can too. Please join us in the Penguin Corps pledge. What are we trying to do?
Change the world.
How do you change the world?
Be crazy enough to think you can.
Penguin Corps agenda. Leader, Quinn calls meeting to order. Stu Keroff, introduction and history. Leighton, activities and impact. Sophie, diversity and inclusion. Jason, our response to COVID-19. Julia, why have an open source club? Shelby, how to do this. Q&A. Please save questions for the end. Now please welcome Mr. Stu Keroff.
Hello and good afternoon. People sometimes find it strange to find out that I am not a coder or a sysadmin by trade. I'm a social studies teacher, and it's time for a history lesson. In September of 2019, I got a new to country student in my class. This girl was working hard to learn a new culture, including learning English. I used Google Translate to convert some materials to Russian for her. And while that was great at school, it really didn't help her at home because her family didn't have a computer. Luckily, one of the first things I did when I started working at Aspen Academy was to start a club that taught kids how to use open source to refurbish old computers. Those kids got to work on a machine for my young Russian friend, and we invited her mother to the school to pick it up. Both mom and daughter had tears in their eyes when they found out that the computer was theirs to keep, free of charge. We didn't know it at the time, but this was a process we would end up repeating a few hundred times over the next year and a half. Without open source software, it would not have been possible. Now, I am a believer in the power of open source to transform a school. As you well know, most jobs today require tech skills, so kids need to use tech at school to get them ready for their futures. Kids also need to have tech at home because that can become the place where they attend school. But many families lack the means to get computers for their kids, and no school anywhere has unlimited money to meet these needs. These are pretty daunting problems. But what if I told you that there is a solution that is doable, scalable, and affordable? What if I told you that the digital divide can be closed? What if I told you that students, instead of being recipients of the problem, can help drive the solution? And what if I told you that the answer can fit in the palm of your hand? We use a lot of flash drives at this school. They hold Linux, the computer operating system that fuels what we do. As for all of those questions I just asked, all of those things are true, as some great students and I have been innovating with open source for 10 years here in Minnesota. It started at Community School of Excellence in St. Paul. It's now taking place at Aspen Academy in Savage. Both of these schools have a Linux club. First, Community School of Excellence. It's a Hmong charter school, and its students are mostly Hmong and Karenni, with a high refugee population, high language needs, and high poverty. Similar in many ways to schools in other communities, but different in one. You see, CSE is the home to the Asian Penguins, the school's computer club. The Asian Penguins were the first Linux club at a Minnesota school, and the only one at a Hmong school anywhere in the world. And they were the start of a unique experiment. Get open source software, get used computers, have kids do the work, and see what happens. The results of the experiment are in. This works. Having kids use open source software in school helps the kids, helps the school, and helps the community. How did it start? In 2011, Community School of Excellence launched a one-to-one laptop program, and we ran into a lot of problems that any school with a one-to-one program might have. Students breaking laptops, losing them, etc. To overcome the shortage in my classroom, I got help from Free Geek Twin Cities, who gave me 4 Linux desktop computers. They use Linux because Linux is open source, free to get, free to use for any purpose, free to change, and free to give away. I was already a Linux user, so I thought that was pretty cool. Well, my students loved the computers, and a few kids started to come to my room after school to use them. From that, we started a club to learn about using Linux. The kids were all Asian. The mascot of Linux was a penguin, so we called it the Asian Penguins. But why should a school use Linux at all? Well, there are a few reasons other than the obvious one, that it's free. First, having open source at school gives students a unique experience that very few schools will offer. Another reason for using open source at school is that it's used everywhere else. Set-top boxes, cell phones, self-driving cars, internet-connected crock pots, the list goes on. If our kids decide to go into tech for a career, they will need to know something about open source. But the biggest reason is that using open source in school gave us an affordable way to have our students become technology leaders. Our kids became what I call partners in the process. The kids were learning how to install the OS, configure the apps, run software updates, and change computer parts. And the computers they were working on would be used by other students. We refurbished computers to give to families at home and did a crowdfunding campaign to get laptops to use at school. In 8 years, the Asian Penguins had over 250 kids come through the program, and we introduced hundreds more to Linux and open source software. In 2019, I changed schools, and now I'm at Aspen Academy. For years, we had been telling people that any school could do this. So this was my opportunity to put that to the test. In the Asian Penguins, we made things up as we went along because there was no template for us to follow. But at Aspen, we did have a template, mine. I knew what a Linux club could do because I'd done it. Aspen's leadership had never heard of Linux, but when I described what a Linux club could be for the kids and for the school, they couldn't say yes fast enough. The big question was, will the kids be interested? The answer was yes. When we started at that first meeting in 2019, we had 14 kids who wanted to learn Linux, and that club has grown over time, with 37 right now and over 40 in 2 weeks. A club needs a name, right? We chose the Penguin Corps. The name communicates a sense of mission, and the kids picked up on that right away. The Aspen kids jumped in and started learning about all the different hardware components, how to install the OS, how to configure the apps, and so on. And just like the kids at Community School of Excellence, the Aspen kids loved it. They learned, they grew, they discovered, and they started making a difference. The way that a school Linux club makes an impact is by following this equation: open source software plus used computers plus enthusiastic kids equals more students learn. And it all happened from a pretty simple idea. Get kids using open source software and see what happens. Now it's time to let the kids tell the story. Thank you very much. Up first from the students is Leighton Hedrick.